Richard Williams stood in his son's bedroom doorway, watching something that shouldn't be possible. His hands trembled as he gripped the doorframe, tears streaming down his face. 6-year-old Jason, the boy who hadn't walked without crutches in 3 years, the child that 17 neurologists said would never improve, was standing on his own. Actually standing. No crutches, no support, just standing there with a huge smile on his face. And holding his hands, guiding him with infinite patience, was Miriam, the woman Richard had hired 3 months ago to clean his house. "Look, Daddy," Jason called out, his voice filled with pure joy. "Look what Miss Miriam taught me. I'm standing all by myself." Richard couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because this moment, this impossible, miraculous moment, was everything he'd spent millions of dollars trying to achieve. Every specialist from Boston to Switzerland had failed. Every cutting-edge treatment had done nothing. But somehow, his housekeeper had succeeded where the world's best doctors couldn't. Then Richard's phone buzzed with an email that would shatter everything. An anonymous message with just one sentence and an attachment. "Do you know who is really taking care of your son?" The attachment was a newspaper article from 5 years ago. The headline made Richard's blood run cold. Dr. Miriam Johnson stripped of medical license after patient dies during experimental treatment. Can you imagine that feeling? Watching a miracle unfold while simultaneously discovering that the person creating it might be dangerous. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. 3 months earlier, Richard Williams sat in yet another doctor's office, listening to yet another specialist tell him there was nothing they could do for his son. "Mr. Williams, I've reviewed Jason's case extensively," Dr. Peterson said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "The neurological damage from the accident is simply too severe. Jason's motor control, his muscle coordination, these are functions that, once damaged to this extent, rarely improve. I'm sorry." Richard wanted to scream. This was the 17th specialist he'd consulted. 17 of the most expensive, most prestigious doctors in the world. And every single one said the same thing. Nothing could be done. Jason had been in a car accident 3 years ago when he was just 3 years old. The crash had killed his mother, Emily, instantly, and it had left Jason with severe neurological damage that affected his entire body. He couldn't walk without crutches. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold a spoon. His speech was slurred and difficult to understand. Richard had spent $3 million on treatments, experimental therapies, cutting-edge procedures. Nothing worked. Nothing helped. At home, Jason sat in his special chair by the window, watching other kids play outside, running, jumping, doing all the things he couldn't do. His small face was pressed against the glass, and Richard's heart broke every single time he saw it. Wait, I need to tell you something crucial about Richard Williams, because it explains everything he did next. Richard wasn't just rich. He was a self-made billionaire who'd built a tech empire from nothing. He'd achieved the impossible in business by never accepting no as an answer. But money couldn't fix his son. And for the first time in his life, Richard felt completely powerless. In exactly 48 hours, Richard would meet someone who would change everything. But first, he needed to hit rock bottom. Jason's 6th birthday party was the breaking point. Richard had hired entertainers, bought expensive presents, invited every child from Jason's special needs class. But when the other kids arrived, they could run and play games that Jason couldn't participate in. Richard watched his son's face as the other children raced around the backyard. Jason tried to follow on his crutches, tried to keep up, but within minutes he was exhausted and had to sit down. The other kids didn't mean to be cruel. They just forgot about him as they played. Jason sat alone on a bench, tears running down his face, and Richard felt something inside him shatter. That night, after everyone had gone home, Richard found Jason crying in his room. "Daddy," Jason said through his tears, his words difficult to form. Why can't I be like other kids? Why can't I run?" Richard had no answer. He just held his son and cried with him. The next morning, Richard's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who'd been with the family for 20 years, announced she was retiring. Her arthritis had gotten too bad to continue working. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Williams," she said. "I know this is terrible timing, but I physically can't do the work anymore. I'll help you find a replacement, though, someone good." Little did Richard know the person Mrs. Chen recommended would either save his son's life or put him in terrible danger, but he wouldn't know which until it was almost too late. Miriam Thompson arrived for her interview on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was in her late 30s with gentle eyes and a warm smile that somehow made the enormous mansion feel less empty. "Mrs. Chen spoke very highly of you," Richard said, looking over her resume. "You have experience with special needs children?" "Yes, sir," Miriam said quietly. "I've worked with several families who have children with physical challenges. I'm patient, and I'm good at creating routines that help kids feel comfortable." What Miriam didn't say, what her carefully edited resume didn't show, was that she'd once been Dr. Miriam Johnson, one of the most promising pediatric neurologists in the country, that she'd specialized in motor function rehabilitation, that she'd developed breakthrough techniques for helping children recover from neurological trauma, and that 5 years ago, she'd lost everything. Richard hired her on the spot. He was desperate, exhausted, and something about Miriam's calm presence made him feel like maybe, just maybe, his household could have some peace. "I should warn you," Richard said. "My son Jason has special needs. He requires a lot of patience. The last few housekeepers couldn't handle it. They found it too emotionally difficult to watch a child struggle so much." Miriam's eyes filled with compassion. "Mr. Williams, I won't have any problem with that. In fact, if you'd like, I can help with some of Jason's daily routines. I'm very good with children who need extra support." Would you have trusted her? Would you have seen a kind woman offering help, or would you have questioned why a housekeeper had such specific skills? Miriam met Jason that afternoon. He was in his room trying to put together a puzzle, but his shaking hands kept dropping the pieces. He was frustrated, on the verge of tears. "Hi, Jason," Miriam said softly, kneeling down beside him. "My name is Miss Miriam. I'm going to be helping your daddy take care of the house. Is it okay if I sit with you?" Jason looked at her suspiciously. Most adults looked at him with pity, which he hated, but Miriam's eyes were different. They were kind, but not sad. "I can't do the puzzle," Jason said, his words slow and difficult. "My hands won't work right." "That must be really frustrating," Miriam said. She didn't try to do it for him, didn't offer empty encouragement. She just acknowledged his feelings. "Can I show you a different way to hold the pieces? Something that might make it easier?" Jason nodded. Miriam showed him how to use both hands together, how to support his wrist with his other hand to reduce the shaking. She moved slowly, patiently, never rushing him or showing frustration when it took him several tries. After 20 minutes, Jason successfully placed 3 puzzle pieces. It was the most he'd done in weeks. "You did it," Miriam said, her smile genuine and proud. "Jason, you worked so hard on that. How does it feel?" Jason smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. "It feels good." From the doorway, Richard watched this interaction with something stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt in 3 years, hope. Actually, let me pause here because what happened over the next few weeks is important. Miriam didn't immediately reveal her medical knowledge. She moved carefully, slowly, building trust with both Richard and Jason before she started implementing the rehabilitation techniques she knew could help. Over the next month, Richard noticed changes in Jason. Small changes at first, but changes nonetheless. Jason started eating better because Miriam had figured out special utensils and techniques that made it easier for him to feed himself. He started sleeping through the night because Miriam had created a calming bedtime routine that helped his body relax. He started smiling more because Miriam made every activity, even difficult ones, feel like an adventure rather than therapy. "Miss Miriam," Jason said one afternoon, "can we practice standing today?" "Standing?" Miriam asked casually, though inside her heart raced. This was the opening she'd been waiting for. "Sure. Want to try something new?" What looked like play to anyone watching was actually carefully designed physical therapy. Miriam had Jason help her reach high shelves, building his core strength. She had him race his toy cars across the floor while on his knees, improving his balance. She turned everything into a game, but every game had a therapeutic purpose. Richard watched all of this from a distance, amazed. Jason was laughing, actually laughing while doing exercises that his physical therapist had made feel like torture. "Miss Miriam is really good with him," Mrs. Chen said during one of her final days before retirement. "I knew she would be. She has a gift." "Where did you find her?" Richard asked. Mrs. Chen's face became carefully neutral. She found me, actually, through a household staff agency. Her references were impeccable. What Mrs. Chen didn't say was that she'd been specifically asked by an old friend, someone who'd known Dr. Mariam Johnson before her fall from grace, to give Mariam this chance, to help her find her way back to helping children, even if she couldn't practice medicine anymore. What happened next would prove that Mariam's methods weren't just effective, they were extraordinary, but it would also put her at risk of exposure. In exactly 2 weeks, Jason would stand without crutches for the first time in 3 years. And in exactly 3 weeks, Richard would receive the email that would destroy his trust in Mariam completely. 8 weeks into Mariam's employment, something remarkable happened. Jason was in the living room with Mariam, playing one of their games. This one involved reaching for objects while maintaining balance. "Okay, Jason," Mariam said. "Let's try something brave today. I want you to stand up from your chair without using your crutches, just for 5 seconds. I'll be right here to catch you if you need me." Jason's eyes went wide. "I can't stand without my crutches." "You can't yet," Mariam corrected gently, "but I think you might be ready to try. You've gotten so much stronger these past weeks. Your legs are steadier, your balance is better. Want to see what happens?" Jason bit his lip, scared, but also excited. Slowly, carefully, using Mariam's hands for support, he stood up and stayed standing. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. "Miss Mariam," Jason gasped. "I'm standing. I'm really standing." "You're standing," Mariam confirmed, tears running down her face. "Jason, you're doing it. You're so strong and so brave." Richard, who'd been in his home office, heard the commotion and came running. When he saw Jason standing without support, he stopped dead in his tracks. This was impossible. 17 neurologists had said improvement was impossible. The damage was permanent. Jason would never walk normally. But there was his son, standing on his own, grinning from ear to ear. "Daddy!" Jason called out. "Look! No crutches!" Richard's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, covering his face with his hands, sobbing with relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude. Wait, because what Richard felt in that moment was about to collide with something that would make him question everything. Trust and doubt, gratitude and suspicion, hope and fear, all about to crash together in the worst possible way. That night, after Jason was asleep, Richard couldn't stop thinking about what he'd witnessed. How had Mariam done it? How had a housekeeper succeeded where specialists had failed? He pulled out his laptop, intending to search for additional physical therapy techniques to complement what Mariam was doing. He wanted to hire the best therapist to work alongside her, to accelerate Jason's progress. That's when the email arrived. Sender: anonymous. Subject: "Do you know who is really taking care of your son?" Message: "Mr. Williams, I thought you should know the truth about the woman you've entrusted with your child's care. The attachment explains everything." Richard's hand hovered over the mouse. Something about the anonymous email felt wrong, felt malicious, but fear for his son overrode his instincts. He clicked. The attachment was a newspaper article from 5 years ago. Promising doctor's career ends in tragedy. Dr. Mariam Johnson stripped of license after experimental treatment kills 8-year-old patient. Richard's vision blurred. He forced himself to read the article. Dr. Mariam Johnson, 33, a pediatric neurologist at Boston Children's Hospital, has been permanently stripped of her medical license following the death of 8-year-old Timothy Chen during an experimental rehabilitation treatment. Sources close to the case suggest Dr. Johnson deviated from approved protocols and administered unauthorized therapies that resulted in a catastrophic seizure. The child's parents are pursuing criminal charges. There was a photo attached, a woman in a white coat with an ID badge. The face was familiar. It was Mariam, his housekeeper, the woman he'd trusted with his son. Dr. Mariam Johnson had been a doctor, an experimental doctor whose treatment had killed a child, and she'd been secretly treating Jason. Richard's phone fell from his shaking hands. What would you do in that moment? Would you confront her, call the police, throw her out immediately? Or would you wonder if there was more to the story? Richard didn't sleep that night. He spent hours researching, finding every article he could about Dr. Mariam Johnson's case. The more he read, the more terrified he became. The child who died, Timothy Chen, had a neurological condition similar to Jason's. Dr. Johnson had been trying a new treatment approach, something experimental. The family claimed she'd been reckless, that she'd pushed too hard, that she'd been more interested in her research than in their son's safety. There were quotes from colleagues. Dr. Johnson was always pushing boundaries, sometimes dangerously. She believed she knew better than established protocols. Her arrogance may have cost a child his life, but there were also a few voices defending her. The case was more complicated than the media reported. Dr. Johnson was devastated by what happened. There were factors the investigation didn't fully examine. By dawn, Richard had made his decision. He would confront Miriam immediately. When Miriam arrived for work that morning, Richard was waiting in the foyer. His face was hard, his jaw clenched. "Mr. Williams?" Miriam said, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Is Jason okay?" "Don't," Richard said, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "Don't you dare pretend to care about my son's well-being. Not after what I learned about you." Miriam went pale. "What did you learn?" "That you're Dr. Miriam Johnson. That you killed a child during an experimental treatment. That you've been lying to me from the moment you walked into my house." Miriam closed her eyes, pain washing over her face. "Mr. Williams, please let me explain." "Explain?" Richard shouted. "You've been secretly performing medical treatments on my son, without my knowledge, without my consent. Jason has the same condition as the boy who died under your care. Were you using him, experimenting on him?" "No," Miriam said desperately. "I would never. Jason is safe. Everything I did was safe and proven. Mr. Williams, please, get out," Richard said coldly. "Get out of my house. If you come near my son again, I'll call the police and have you arrested for practicing medicine without a license. I'll make sure you never get near another child." Tears streamed down Miriam's face. "Mr. Williams, I know you're scared. I know you don't trust me. But please, for Jason's sake, let me explain what really happened 5 years ago. The article doesn't tell the whole truth. I was framed." "Of course you were framed," Richard said bitterly. "That's what everyone says. Get out, now." Miriam looked toward the stairs, where she knew Jason was probably still sleeping. She wanted to say goodbye to him, wanted to explain, wanted to make sure he continued his exercises. But Richard's face was stone. There would be no goodbye, no explanation, no second chance. Miriam walked out of the mansion, her heart breaking, knowing that Jason's progress would probably stop without continued therapy, knowing that the little boy she'd grown to love would wonder why she disappeared, and knowing that the truth about what really happened 5 years ago would probably never come to light. What Richard didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for another week, was that the anonymous email hadn't come from someone trying to protect Jason. It had come from someone who wanted to destroy Miriam one final time, someone who'd framed her 5 years ago and couldn't allow her to find redemption. And that same person was already planning their next move. 3 days after Miriam left, Jason stopped eating. He sat at the breakfast table, pushing his food around his plate, tears running silently down his face. He hadn't spoken more than a few words since waking up that first morning to find Miriam gone. "Jason, buddy, you need to eat something," Richard said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite his own exhaustion and guilt. "Where's Miss Miriam?" Jason asked for the 100th time, his words slurred with emotion and his speech difficulties. "Why did she leave? Did I do something wrong?" Richard's heart shattered. "No, son, you didn't do anything wrong. Miss Miriam she had to go away." "But I was getting better," Jason said, crying harder now. "She was helping me. I could stand. I was going to walk soon. She promised we'd keep practicing." Richard had no answer, because Jason was right. In the 3 days since Miriam left, Jason had regressed. His hands shook more. His balance was worse. And worst of all, the light that had been growing in his eyes, the hope, was gone. Richard had called Jason's regular physical therapist to resume sessions, but Jason refused to cooperate. He just sat there, lifeless, asking for Miss Miriam. That afternoon, while Jason napped fitfully, Richard sat in his office staring at the newspaper article about Miriam for the 100th time. Something about it nagged at him. Something felt off. Richard hadn't built a billion-dollar company by accepting things at face value. He'd succeeded by digging deeper, by questioning narratives, by finding the truth others missed. He picked up his phone and called his head of corporate security, Marcus Chen. "Marcus, I need you to investigate someone thoroughly. I want to know everything, not just what's in the public record, but what really happened. Can you do that?" "Of course, Mr. Williams. Who are we investigating?" "Dr. Miriam Johnson. She lost her medical license 5 years ago after a patient died. I need to know if the official story is the whole story." What Marcus would discover over the next 72 hours would turn everything Richard believed upside down, and it would reveal a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone imagined. Marcus Chen was good at his job, very good. Within 24 hours, he'd pulled together a file that was 3 inches thick. He sat down in Richard's office with a grim expression. "Mr. Williams, you need to see this, and I think you're going to want it to sit down." Marcus opened the file. The official story is that Dr. Mariam Johnson performed an unauthorized experimental treatment on 8-year-old Timothy Chen, resulting in a fatal seizure. She was blamed for deviating from approved protocols, acting recklessly, and prioritizing her research over the patient's safety. "That's what I read," Richard said. "But here's what the official story doesn't mention," Marcus continued. "Timothy Chen wasn't Dr. Johnson's patient initially. He was under the care of Dr. Robert Westfield, head of the pediatric neurology department. Timothy's condition was deteriorating rapidly under Dr. Westfield's treatment. The parents, desperate, asked for Dr. Johnson's opinion because they'd heard about her innovative approaches." Marcus pulled out medical records. Dr. Johnson reviewed the case and recommended a different treatment protocol, one she'd developed through years of research. It was unconventional but showed promise in clinical trials. The parents signed consent forms. Everything was documented and approved by the hospital ethics board. "So what went wrong?" Richard asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Marcus said darkly. The treatment was working. For 3 weeks, Timothy showed remarkable improvement. Better motor control, reduced seizures, increased cognitive function. Then, on the day of the incident, Timothy had a catastrophic seizure and died. Marcus pulled out another document. But here's what nobody knew at the time. The autopsy showed Timothy had 3 times the prescribed dosage of medication in his system. Someone had altered his medication regimen the night before he died. Richard's blood ran cold. Someone deliberately overdosed him? It appears so. And here's the kicker. The medication records showed Dr. Johnson's signature authorizing the change, but Marcus pulled out a handwriting analysis report. Forensic analysis proves that signature was forged. Wait, because this is where the conspiracy gets truly disturbing. Someone didn't just frame Dr. Mariam Johnson for malpractice. Someone murdered a child to destroy her career. "Why?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would someone do that?" Marcus pulled out more documents. Dr. Mariam Johnson had developed a revolutionary treatment protocol for pediatric neurological rehabilitation. It was simple, cost-effective, and didn't require expensive equipment or pharmaceutical interventions. She was about to publish her research. And someone didn't want that research published, Richard concluded. Exactly. Dr. Robert Westfield had spent 15 years developing his own treatment protocols. Protocols that required expensive proprietary equipment manufactured by a company he had financial stakes in. If Dr. Johnson's research proved that simple, affordable techniques could achieve better results, it would have destroyed Westfield's reputation and cost him millions in revenue. Marcus laid out a timeline. Look at what happened after Dr. Johnson lost her license. Westfield was promoted to chief of pediatric neurology. He secured a major research grant. His equipment company's stock tripled. And every doctor who supported Dr. Johnson's research either transferred to other hospitals or stopped their work. "You're saying Westfield killed a child to protect his profits?" Richard asked, horrified. "I'm saying the evidence points that way, but it gets worse." Marcus pulled out surveillance photos. Dr. Westfield has been tracking Dr. Johnson for years. He has a private investigator who monitors her movements, her employment, everything. And 3 days ago, that same investigator sent an anonymous email to a certain tech billionaire. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Westfield sent me that email. He wanted to destroy Mariam's chance at redemption. He couldn't let her help another child, Marcus confirmed. Because if she succeeded, if she proved her methods worked, people might start asking questions about what really happened 5 years ago. Can you imagine the rage Richard felt in that moment? He'd thrown out the one person who could help his son because of lies spread by the man who'd murdered a child to protect his profits. In exactly 6 hours, Richard would make a choice that would either expose the conspiracy or put his son in even greater danger. But first, he needed to find Mariam. Richard tried every contact method he had for Mariam, but they all led to dead ends. The address on her employment application was a P.O. box. The phone number went to voicemail that wasn't set up. The references had disconnected numbers. She's deliberately hard to find, Marcus explained. When you've been destroyed the way she was, you learn to stay invisible. Then how do we find her? Richard demanded. Marcus smiled slightly. We use the same investigator who's been tracking her for Westfield. I've already convinced him to switch sides for the right price and immunity from prosecution. 2 hours later, Richard had an address. Mariam was living in a small apartment 30 miles away, working night shifts at a diner to make ends meet. Richard drove there himself, his heart pounding. What would he say? How could he possibly apologize for not believing her, for throwing her out, for choosing to trust a newspaper article over the woman who'd given his son hope? The apartment building was old, with peeling paint and broken steps, so different from the mansion Mariam had worked in. Richard climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 3C. The door opened a crack. Mariam's face appeared, and when she saw Richard, her expression cycled through shock, fear, and resignation. "Mr. Williams," she said quietly, "I understand if you're here to threaten legal action, but please, I need to explain." "You were framed," Richard interrupted. "Timothy Chen was murdered to destroy your career and your research. Dr. Westfield forged your signature to make it look like you authorized the overdose, and I threw you out based on lies fed to me by the man who killed a child." Mariam stared at him, tears immediately filling her eyes. You believe me?" "I'm so sorry," Richard said, his own voice breaking. "I should have listened to you. I should have investigated before I reacted. Mariam, I need your help. Jason needs you. He's stopped eating. He's regressed. He asks for you every day. Please, will you come back?" What Mariam said next would determine not just Jason's future, but whether justice would finally be served for Timothy Chen's murder. Mariam wiped her tears. "Mr. Williams, I lost everything 5 years ago. My career, my reputation, my ability to help children. Working with Jason these past months, it was the first time I felt like myself again, like I had a purpose. But, Richard prompted. "But if I come back, if I continue helping Jason, Westfield will find out. He's been tracking me. He'll come after you, after Jason, after your reputation. He's a powerful man with powerful connections. Are you prepared for that fight?" "I've spent the last 3 years watching my son suffer," Richard said fiercely. "I've felt powerless, helpless, unable to protect him from his own body. You gave him hope. You gave him progress. You gave him joy. If Westfield wants a fight, he's going to get one, but I won't let him hurt another child. Not Jason, not ever again." Mariam took a shaky breath. "Then yes, I'll come back. But Mr. Williams, I need you to understand something. I can help Jason. I know I can, but I can't be his housekeeper anymore. If I'm going to do this right, you need to let me actually treat him as his doctor, even if I don't have a license anymore." "Then we'll get your license back," Richard said. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I have resources, lawyers, investigators. We'll expose what Westfield did. We'll clear your name, and we'll make sure no one can ever do this to you again." Actually, let me tell you what happened when Mariam returned to the mansion, because Jason's reaction shows how deeply children understand what's real and what's lies. When Mariam walked into Jason's room that evening, the little boy was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, his face expressionless. "Jason," Mariam said softly, "I'm back." Jason's head whipped around so fast it must have hurt. His eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared like he couldn't believe she was real. Then he burst into tears. "Miss Mariam, you came back. I thought you didn't want me anymore because I wasn't getting better fast enough." Mariam rushed to his bed and gathered him into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart, no. Never think that. You were doing so well. You are so strong and so brave. I'm sorry I had to leave, but I'm back now and I'm not going anywhere. Do you understand? I'm going to stay and help you get even stronger." "Promise?" Jason asked through his tears. "I promise," Mariam said firmly, "and you know what? Your daddy is going to help too. We're all going to work together." Jason looked at Richard, who was standing in the doorway trying not to cry. "Daddy, can Miss Mariam stay forever?" Richard smiled through his tears. "Yes, son, forever." Over the next few days, Jason's transformation was remarkable. He started eating again. He laughed again. And most importantly, he started progressing again. Mariam worked with Jason every day, documenting everything carefully. She wanted concrete evidence of her treatment's effectiveness, evidence that could help clear her name and prove her research was sound. In exactly 2 weeks, Richard would launch the legal battle to restore Miriam's medical license. But the opposition would be fiercer than anyone expected. Richard hired the best medical malpractice attorneys in the country. They filed a motion to reopen Dr. Miriam Johnson's case, presenting new evidence of the forged signature, the investigator's testimony, and forensic proof that Timothy Chen had been deliberately overdosed. The medical board scheduled a hearing. It should have been straightforward, the evidence was clear, the conspiracy obvious. But Dr. Robert Westfield had spent 5 years consolidating power. He had friends on the medical board. He had political connections. He had media contacts ready to spin any story in his favor. The day before the hearing, Richard received a phone call from an unknown number. "Mr. Williams?" a smooth voice said. "This is Dr. Robert Westfield. I think we should talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Richard said coldly. "Not even if I can make all of this go away? Drop your crusade against me, and I'll personally oversee Jason's care, free of charge, the best treatment money can buy." "You mean the expensive, ineffective treatment that keeps patients dependent on your equipment?" "I mean legitimate medical care from a licensed physician, unlike the quack medicine that disgraced doctor is giving your son. Mr. Williams, do you really want to stake your son's health on a woman who killed a child?" "She didn't kill anyone," Richard said. "You did, and I'm going to prove it." Westfield's voice hardened. "Be very careful, Mr. Williams. I've destroyed bigger obstacles than you, and if you force my hand, I'll make sure the world knows you let an unlicensed, disgraced doctor experiment on your disabled son. Child Protective Services will be very interested in that story." The line went dead. "What would you do if someone threatened to take your child away for trying to help them? Would you back down, or would you fight even harder?" The hearing was held in a sterile conference room at the Medical Licensing Board. Miriam sat at a table with Richard's attorneys, her hands shaking, facing the 5-member board that would decide her fate. Dr. Westfield sat across the room, confident and composed, surrounded by his own legal team. "This hearing will determine whether new evidence warrants reinstatement of Dr. Miriam Johnson's medical license," the board chairman announced. "Mr. Williams, you may present your case." Richard's lead attorney stood. "We have forensic evidence that Dr. Johnson's signature authorizing Timothy Chen's medication change was forged. We have the testimony of the private investigator hired to track Dr. Johnson and sabotage her career. We have financial records showing Dr. Westfield's monetary interest in discrediting Dr. Johnson's research, and we have medical evidence that Dr. Johnson's treatment methods are not only safe, but remarkably effective." The attorney presented Jason's medical records, before and after Miriam's treatment. The improvement was undeniable. "Objection," Westfield's attorney said smoothly. "These records show unsupervised, unauthorized medical treatment of a minor by an unlicensed individual. This is evidence of further malpractice, not exoneration." The board members murmured amongst themselves, looking concerned. Miriam's attorney countered. "Mr. Williams gave full consent and was present for all treatments. Furthermore, the treatment protocols used are documented in Dr. Johnson's research that was peer-reviewed and approved before the Timothy Chen incident." "Research that led to a child's death," Westfield interjected, speaking directly to the board. Members of the board, Dr. Johnson's arrogance and disregard for established medical protocols resulted in tragedy once. Are we really going to give her the opportunity to harm more children? That's when someone entered the room who would change everything. Someone no one expected to see. The conference room door opened, and a woman in her 50s walked in, her face drawn but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but my name is Linda Chen, and I'm Timothy Chen's mother." The room went silent. Every eye turned to the woman whose son's death had destroyed Miriam's career. "Mrs. Chen," the board chairman said carefully, "we appreciate your loss, but this is a closed hearing." "I have evidence," Linda Chen interrupted, her voice shaking but firm. "Evidence that proves Dr. Johnson didn't kill my son. Evidence that I've been too afraid to share until now." She pulled out a small recording device. "The night before Timothy died, I couldn't sleep. I was staying at the hospital, in a room next to Timothy's. At 2 a.m., I heard someone enter his room. I thought it was a nurse doing routine checks, but something felt wrong, so I recorded it on my phone." Linda pressed play. A conversation filled the room. "Is the boy asleep?" A man's voice, Westfield's voice. "Yes, doctor." A woman's voice, nervous. "Good. Adjust his medication dosage to 3 times normal. Make it look like Dr. Johnson authorized it. By morning, the problem will solve itself. But doctor, that dose could kill him. That's the point. Johnson's treatment is working. If the boy recovers, her research gets published, and everything I've built collapses. This ends tonight. The recording continued with sounds of medication being administered, then footsteps leaving. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, attorneys scrambled. Westfield turned pale, then red, then tried to leave, but security blocked the doors. Linda Chen was crying. I've lived with this guilt for 5 years. I knew someone killed my son, but I was afraid. Westfield threatened me, said if I spoke up, he'd destroy my family like he destroyed Dr. Johnson. But when I heard he was trying to stop another child from getting help, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Wait, because what happened next showed that sometimes justice moves slowly, but it moves. Dr. Robert Westfield was arrested that day. The charges included murder, conspiracy, forgery, and medical fraud. The investigation expanded to uncover 6 other cases where he'd sabotaged colleagues who threatened his profits. The medical board voted unanimously to restore Dr. Miriam Johnson's medical license immediately. They also issued a formal apology and offered her a position at any hospital she chose. But Miriam had a different plan. Mr. Williams, she said that evening, I don't want to work for a hospital. I want to open a clinic. A place where children who've been told they'll never improve can get real help. A place where treatment isn't about profit, but about healing. Richard smiled. Then let's do it. The Richard and Emily Williams Foundation for Pediatric Rehabilitation, and you'll be the medical director. You'd do that? Miriam asked, tears in her eyes. You gave me my son back, Richard said simply. This is the least I can do. 1 year later, everything had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Jason's 7th birthday party was nothing like his 6th. This time, he wasn't sitting on the sidelines watching other kids play. He was running, actually running, playing tag with his friends, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. His speech was clear. His hands were steady. He'd started regular school and was thriving. Standing on the mansion's terrace, watching her son play, stood Miriam. No longer the housekeeper, but something much more important. Richard came up beside her, slipping his hand into hers. He's amazing. You're amazing, Miriam smiled. He did all the hard work. I just showed him how. You did more than that, Richard said softly. You gave him his life back. You gave me hope when I had none. You changed everything. Over the past year, something had grown between Richard and Miriam, something deeper than gratitude, stronger than friendship. They'd been through a battle together, fought for truth together, and built something beautiful together. The clinic had opened 6 months ago. 37 children who'd been told they'd never improve were now making progress. Miriam's research had been published to international acclaim, and Timothy Chen's death had finally been avenged. Daddy! Miss Miriam! Jason called out, running over to them without a trace of his former struggle. Come play with us! Richard and Miriam exchanged a look. Then Richard called out, Jason, there's something Miss Miriam and I want to talk to you about. Jason ran up, excited and curious. What? How would you feel, Richard asked carefully, if Miss Miriam stayed with us? Not as someone who works for us, but as part of our family? Jason's eyes went wide. You mean, like, you want Miss Miriam to be my new mom? Only if you want that too, Miriam said gently. I love you and your daddy very much. But this is your family, Jason. You get to decide. Jason looked between them, his face serious. Then he broke into the biggest smile either of them had ever seen. Yes, he shouted. Yes, yes, yes. I want Miss Miriam to be my mom. I've wanted that since forever. He threw himself into both their arms and they held him tight, all 3 of them crying happy tears. The story ends 6 months after that, at Richard and Miriam's wedding. It was a small ceremony in the mansion's garden, with just close friends and the 37 children from the clinic who Miriam called her other kids. Jason stood beside his father as best man, standing tall and steady, reading a speech he'd written himself. When I was little and sick, everyone said I'd never get better. But Miss Miriam, Mom, she didn't believe that. She saw me when everyone else saw a problem. She helped me when everyone else gave up. And she taught me that sometimes the people who can help us the most are the ones nobody expects. He looked at Miriam with pure love. Mom saved my life. And then she saved my dad's life too, by teaching him how to hope again. And now we're a real family. The best family ever. Miriam was crying too hard to speak. Richard pulled both of them into a hug, and the small crowd applauded. Later, as the sun set over the garden, Jason played with his friends, running, jumping, doing all the things he'd once believed were impossible. Richard and Miriam stood together, watching, marveling at how far they'd all come. "Do you ever regret it?" Richard asked quietly. "Losing 5 years of your life because you tried to help children?" Miriam thought about it. "I regret that Timothy died. I'll carry that pain forever. But everything that happened, it led me here, to you, to Jason, to all those kids at the clinic who now have hope. So no, I don't regret the journey, only the cost others paid. We'll make sure that cost means something," Richard promised. "Every child we help, every life we change, it honors Timothy's memory. And it proves that your way, the way of compassion and patience and treating patients like people instead of profit sources, is the right way." Miriam leaned against him. "I love you, both of you, my impossible family." "Nothing's impossible," Richard said, kissing her forehead. "You taught us that." From across the garden, Jason called out, "Mom, Dad, come dance with me." And they did. The billionaire, the redeemed doctor, and the boy who'd been told he'd never walk, dancing together under the stars, proof that sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unexpected places, and that love, trust, and perseverance can overcome even the darkest conspiracies. If you enjoy this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.